All right, interrupting with empathy. A quick note on notes. Mine didn't work on my electronic device this morning, so I'm riffing, and we'll see riffing like a griffin. Door. So we'll see what happens. Back on April Fool's Day, I did a sermon where I read the whole thing from my notes, which is not usually my style, so this is going to be the opposite. And we'll see what happens. So, interrupting with empathy. Please don't interrupt for the duration of this sermon, empathetic or not. So we're going to do 3 concepts all around interrupting with empathy. 3 different ways to apply this. And the thing I want to let you know first is that this is an advanced communication tactic. This is an advanced communication tactic. Have any of you felt lately as if you could use some advanced communication tactics? Yes, as have I. So a great book you might want to read is a book called Crucial Conversations. It has a lot of, it's a popular business book, but it has a lot of these really pithy kind of points about how to hack some of our harder conversations. And the point I wanted to make about that was they define what is a crucial conversation. It's when maybe both sides of the issue are kind of charged, and you really ought to talk it out, but ordinary old communication is not going to work. Have you tried this, right? You've gone into a charged thing and you're like, hey, let's just talk normal. Right? We're adults here. That does not work. So when I learned nonviolent communication, also another great little path to that Marshall Rosenberg's work on nonviolent communication, my teacher introduced this concept he called red light, yellow light, green light communication moments, right? So the green light communication is, when I'm like, hey, knock, knock, who's there? Interrupting cow, and moo, and you're like, ha, 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 ha. But if we were in a red light moment, you'd be like, what do you mean by that? How dare you interrupt me while I was saying interrupting cow who? So have you had these conversations where you try to lighten the mood or something, and the person was like, are you serious right now? No, I'm not serious. I'm trying to lighten the mood. Well, be serious. This is a serious. So when the tone shifts in the conversation, you've entered perhaps a yellow light moment. Okay, those of you in driver's ed, any 15-year-olds in the room? Yeah, those of you in driver's ed, what does yellow light mean?
Watch really fast.
What is it? No, don't step on the gas. Caution. Caution. Right? But, naughty. Interrupt you with empathy. But, often in our conversations, we'll do what we do at a traffic light. We start to feel that yellow light come on, and we'll talk faster. Have you noticed this? You don't do it, obviously, but your friends and family members do. Faster or louder, right? Or we'll use harsher words because we want to make sure we get our point across. It feels so crucial that everything, speed up, I'm not going to make that light. If I don't make that light, then I won't make it to work 15 minutes early. Okay. And then there's red light communication, which is when you really ought to just walk away. Right? Maybe you've tried these conversations where it just makes the relationship worse. The more you try it, this has to do with our brain physiology. There's 6 little cells pasted on the top of your brain called the neocortex. That's responsible for all of your out-of-the-box thinking, your empathy, your ability to take others' perspectives. It's 6 cells thick in most places. Neuroscientists don't call it, but in some places it's 6 of them. So then the rest of you, there's a Rottweiler underneath that. My tribe, my territory. Pet me? And then underneath that is a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Right? So once you hit red light, it's all Tyrannosauri. Right? There's no human conversation going on. It's all about trying to get my needs met because you're being flooded with these hormones that raise your heart rate, that they literally make you have tunnel vision, and they also figuratively make you have tunnel vision. Have you experienced this before in a stressful interaction, right? And you walk away and you go like, I could have said this, But you couldn't have because those circuits are offline. There's not enough blood to run fight or flight circuits and out-of-the-box peacemaking, etc. circuits. So my teacher said, look, especially like in a marriage, some of us have experienced this, or a long-term friendship, if you find yourself hitting red light, stop the conversation, commit to come back in a half hour, which is like the half-life of some of those hormones or something like that, or tomorrow, or Friday. let's get a drink on Friday, whatever that is. And then often you'll come back and you'll be like, you'll hear the person say, I was thinking about what you said, and actually you had a few good points. Has anybody ever had, this is a little more miraculous, but have you ever had this happen? You paused a conversation, you came back on Friday, and they said, actually, I gave what you said a chance. So yeah, a couple of nods. This can happen. Okay, so the thing about a crucial conversation is when you're in the yellow and the red. And so today, we're talking about some yellow light tactics. And I don't think it's just me who may feel like we're in the yellow light a lot lately, right? Like, I don't know if there was a good old days where we were walking around like there was more green light going on, but now it seems like you get in conversations and a lot of us are already so freaked out about what's happening in our own lives, what's happening in the world, or someone we love, or a group of someone's that we love who's being targeted by a supremacist regime or something, hypothetically like that. We're coming in with a certain sort of cortisol load and decision fatigue, and so we're already in a yellow light. And these kind of conversations, we're going to find ourselves in that liminal space, in that wilderness kind of space a lot more often. So we better ought to have these tools on hand. Would you say? Okay, cool. Sound useful? Sound reasonable? Okay. Alrighty. So, interrupting with empathy. The first technique, this is all winding up to this really cool thing, but we got to get the ground rules down. So, interrupting with empathy, my communication mentor taught, is for when you have a friend, this could also be you, but we hardly notice it when it's us. You have a friend or a family member or someone who seems to get in conversational loops, right? Have you ever been in a conversation where you thought it was a dialogue, but it turns out they think it's a monologue? Who's seen a conversation like that happen in your presence? Yeah. And sometimes, you can't put your neighbor's hand down. No, that never happens. Let me tell you how it really is. Sometimes we'll get in a convo with someone and they'll and you're trying not to go that's a very good point. Or because you learned how to be a polite communicator. There's this book I'm going to check and see if it's in the library called We Need to Talk. And it's all about these, like how do you create these, and the biggest one is that object manipulation, when you're in a conversation, registers in our brain as a sign of contempt or disrespect. So like, don't manipulate objects in a conversation. Keep eye contact. Go like this every once in a while. I know my voice is so entrancing that everybody just goes like this, but go like this to me sometimes too. I'll be less nervous. It would be really fun. So we want to do that, but then after the monologue continues for a little while, it's like, how much can a person bear? And then to make matters worse, sometimes you'll have a friend who, every time you talk to them, they bring up the same stuff. Have you ever, maybe you've been this person. Because actually, I've been this person, because sometimes like, you just got something going on for you, right? Your friend calls you, hey, how's it going? Well, I'm still thinking about what I'm going to do for work. And, that's accurate. But this technique was, some of us are coaches or therapists or things like that, and we'll see our coaching clients, and they'll come in, oh, how are you this week? And it's the same thing. Well, this and that about this trauma, and this and that about this thing, and it doesn't seem to go anywhere. And if you're someone's friend or someone's coach, often we want to see each other grow, right? We're there for each other because we want to see each other thrive. And there's a certain amount of empathy that's nice to hold, especially if you're a coach or a therapist. There's a certain amount of, hey, yeah, lay it on me. I'll take the garbage out later. But there's a certain point where you start to sense like, this is just the same loop playing out over and over again. Or in a conversation, this person's just talking and talking and talking without any regard for whether we're having a dialogue. And my coach said, this is a moment where you must interrupt with empathy. Interrupt with empathy. So, who here loves to interrupt others in a conversation? Go ahead, self-identify. Great, okay. And then who, like me, was taught that that's a great sin? Never, don't interrupt others. Okay, and then the rest of you, I'm just going to say, are probably somewhere in the middle or on the fringes. Who knows? So, a lot of us, though, in friendly conversation, would think, even if we're going to interrupt, we would think, oh, that's impolite, right? Here's your friend, they're having a monologue with you. Having a monologue at you, you know, and even if you're going to interrupt, the mind says like, okay, it's time to be rude, right? So this notion says, what if interruption was the least rude thing you can do? And here's the reason why. When we're in these loops, according to this notion that my coach taught me, we're looping because we have not yet gotten the empathy we need to integrate whatever material is underlying the story that we're telling. So we're telling this story over and over again. There's something in us, maybe you've noticed this, that thinks getting our story heard is going to give us this emotional nutrition we need, right? But that's not actually true. Right? Sometimes it is, but your friend, if they got the emotional nutrition they needed, they wouldn't tell you the story again and again and again. So in this case, the idea is your friend's going on, blah, 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 blah. I'm just trying to give you an emotional sense of what this feels like. Blah, 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 blah. And you go, here's the technique, are you ready? You go, wait, I want to pause you right there because it sounds like this is really important and I want to make sure I'm understanding. I'm going to pause you right there because it sounds like this is really important to you and I want to make sure I'm understanding you. Do you mean to say, 15 years ago, someone cut in front of you at Costco? And in that moment, the story you were telling yourself was that you didn't matter? Because all through your life, people told you you didn't matter and you felt invisible? And you had a sense of heartbreak because you deeply longed to be seen and known? And this was just the last sign that no one was ever going to know you? And you might be surprised at what happens in a stupid story about Costco that you've heard for the last 7 years every time you go out to coffee. When you inquire deeper into why that person might be telling that story, what's actually in their heart underneath the I got cut off with a card at Costco story. I think we've all got one of those stories. So empathy, as we're saying it, is a fundamental human nutrient. Would you agree? Have you ever had to go without in the desert of empathy? Right? And it's like those old movies when they're in the desert for water. You would care. Dignity. Oh, my kingdom for dignity. Right? We need to be seen in our common humanity. But the bad news is that almost none of us have any tools for that. Right? We're just now sort of growing into an awareness as a species that we could really meet each other. I mean, maybe there are some older cultures on Earth that had this. I'm actually thinking of a few as I say this. But we've been through this long term of like fixed cultural roles where here's the priesthood and here's the laity and here's the peasants and here's the serfs and you just go about your job. And then we grew from that into industry where we can be consumers and we can figure out what we're supposed to consume from each other. And very few of us have, as a fundamental value, deeply seeing the dignity of each other as the primary goal in relationship. In relationships at the supermarket, in relationships at church, in relationships on the highway, even in relationships with our friends, it can be hard because all the momentum's going in a different way. How you get your emotional needs met is telling your story. It doesn't work. How you get your emotional needs met is getting someone to accede to your strategy. It doesn't work. If you're lucky, you'll have tested this. People will have acceded to your strategies. They'll be doing everything that you want. You're a tiny dictator in your world. And you'll notice you're still unhappy. There's no real, because they're not really seeing you. They're just doing what you said. We're missing a fundamental nutrient of empathy. So the idea of interrupting with empathy is not disregarding a person's story. Oh, okay, yeah, that's what happened to you this week. But letting them know, in addition to your story, I want to know what you're feeling. Are you sad, mad, glad, scared, confused? And I want to know what you're needing. Are you worried about where food is going to come from? Are you lacking sleep? Have you been met lately and known? Have you had enough hugs today? Have you had too many hugs today? Get away from me, please. Right? I want to know what those things are because our stories are wildly divergent. Have you noticed? Just go on this thing I found called the internet, and you'll find we got totally different stories about what's going on. Like things that seem pretty reasonable, like how many planets are in the solar system, right? You can find probably 18 different stories about what the answer is to that question. We've got all kinds of different strategies, like how do you make a country safe? But the fundamental human needs that underlie are all the same. These are things that we share from heart to heart, no matter who you are, where you came from, or even sort of how bad it's gotten for you or how bad you have made it for others. This philosophy, and it's the philosophy of our universalist ancestors, of this basic goodness in our hearts, says everything you've ever done has been trying to meet some fundamental human needs that we all share universally. That's pretty cool. So when your buddy is in a loop, right, you're going to say, hold on. Sounds like something really important is going on there. And I want to make sure I understand you. And right there, that's almost enough because it's like a total tilt to the system. Nobody ever says that to me. But have you, like I've never heard this, okay, I hear it sometimes on NPR. They have some pretty good interviewers, right? But like in normal conversation, I almost never hear somebody go like, hold on, I want to really make sure I'm understanding you. And so if you throw that one in a conversation, somebody will go like, and then they're open for a minute, and then you just guess. Because the cool thing is if you go, I'm guessing that, you really needed to be seen and known. They go, no. That's not what it was. It was my need for agency and autonomy. But in either case, you got access to that fundamental human value, which is the dignity of their heart that was longing to shine forth. Really cool. So we interrupt them rudely, impolitely, to give more love than we could in a monologue. What do you think? Fun? That's technique number one. Interrupting with empathy with no notes. Thank you very much. Hold on. I deserve the reward. Okay. Number 1.5, I guess. There's not really 3. This is 1.5. So the same thing can happen. And there's going to be more of this in next week's talk, so I hope you come to that because it's going to be really fun. The same thing can actually happen when you have widely diverging views with someone. So the first one was, it's your pal. And you notice they just keep telling you this thing over and over and over again. And you're like, oh wow, oh that sounds really bad. And then they tell you next time. Our minds now are trained that we're going to go, wow, it seems like maybe I didn't really get them. Maybe there's something they need to have known in order so that can start to heal and resolve. Now you are at, what's coming up? Thanksgiving dinner, I think, is the next big culture holiday we have coming up in the US. So Thanksgiving dinner, and Uncle Joe's there. And you know Uncle Joe, right? And Uncle Joe's gonna do his riff about the illegals, right? The infestation, this is the one I heard from our fearless leader on the radio this morning, the infestation that we're dealing with. And it's probably going to be really hard to endure any dialogue or monologue with Uncle Joe. True or false? Just making sure we're still a liberal religious community. But, because in Unitarian Universal, the principle number one is the inherent worth and dignity of every being. So even if you want a stronger immigration policy, you don't get to call people illegal, right? In this particular philosophy. No person their being is not illegal. People don't infest places, right? People try to get fundamental universal needs met. And often if we help them get those needs met, then we're all happy together, and that's really a different topic. So Uncle Joe doing his thing with the thing and the thing and the thing. And it's going to be really hard to sit there and either shut up because you don't want to encourage Uncle Joe and listen to the monologue, or say something into the conversation. We've all tried these, right? Some of us have tried, oh God, here he goes again, and you just like have another glass of wine, right? Or here he goes again, and you're like, you know what, Uncle Joe, I'm really sick of hearing this. What you need to know is this and this and this. That's also no fun. And it would be okay if it was no fun if it taught Uncle Joe something, but rarely does it teach Uncle Joe something. So you have one other option. Now, I'm not dissing either of these options. Do those options if you want to. They have their place. Sometimes they have their place for us. I have had moments where, because I didn't have any other presence of mind and I was just, something needs to be done, I said, look, you can't say that crap here. Nobody's going to let you. And that's cool. They don't learn anything, but the rest of us felt like we were safe or something along those lines. I practiced not just being an introvert and actually getting the heck out of my shell for a minute. But if you want to do something hard and interesting, you could say, hold on, Uncle Joe, let me interrupt you because it sounds like this is really important to you, and I want to make sure I understand. Because, Uncle Joe's needs don't have inherent worth and dignity, right? It's not important to understand him because he's deplorable. There's an infestation of Uncle Joe's? No. But it hurts. Let's not deny that. Sounds like this is really important, and I want to make sure I understand Uncle Joe. Are you saying, like you said last year, that you're concerned about American jobs? Yeah, I'm really concerned about it. Are you saying that, like, if we don't really figure out what we're doing with immigration, then we're going to be living in a lawless society? Yeah, nobody ever asked it to me that way. I am really concerned about a lawless society. Me too, Uncle Joe. I'm really concerned about the rule of law. Let's talk about that. And I wouldn't be telling you this if I had not tried this out myself and had conversations that you would never expect to happen with the seemingly rabid individual who spouted the nonsense that they were spouting. Because in many cases, people are spouting hateful rhetoric, even hateful rhetoric. I'm sorry to say this, it's not actually popular to say this, and we'll get to the popular part in a minute. But even hateful rhetoric is coming from universal human needs that have been so long unmet that they've festered and turned into this toxic rot inside of us that all we can do is enact our tension and our reactivity. And sometimes getting a glimmer of empathy, interrupting with it. We're not saying, hey, Uncle Joe, yeah, tell me a little bit more. No, we're going to say, stop. This sounds really important to you. I want to make sure I understand. Because we're not acceding to Uncle Joe's strategy in that moment. We're not validating Uncle Joe's story in that moment. Let's make it clear. We're not saying, yeah, Joe, I agree with you, buddy. Cheers to you. No, we're saying this sounds important to you, and I want to know why. I love you enough, and I love the people you're spouting rhetoric enough that I really need to know how the hell you came up with those ideas. Pardon my language. And interesting things can happen that couldn't happen when we just entrenched into our bunkers and lobbed memes at each other. Okay. Your chances are actually pretty good on this. I forget the author's name because that was in my notes, but I do remember the statistic. Did you know in America, only 1 in 25 of us is a sociopath? That's right.
So there's probably only one in here right now.
Yeah. 1 or 2? Yeah. 1.5 sociopath. So what that means is that only 1 out of those 25 times are you going to try to do that, and they're going to be immune to empathy and opening your heart. Because everybody but like a hard sociopath, right? That's like no sense of conscience, no real empathy. Anybody but that is operating from these exact same universal values. Like, the reason that we're in these weird entrenched positions is because we're fearful and we want to take care of ourselves and each other. And maybe each other only extends as far as their tribe. But a lot of times that's just because we're so tight because of fear. By creating more fear and division, we don't dissolve that tightness. So the good news is, because I think our minds go like, oh yeah, empathize with Uncle Joe, and that just gives the narcissist a chance. But only 1 in 25 are these really uncaring, unfeeling beings. The rest of us grow uncaring because we do not ever get the mirror of care from each other. So this is like a Unitarian miracle. It has happened. You shine the light of universal care. You go, you know what, I don't agree with your strategy at all. Let's be clear on that. But I love you. And amazing things can happen that didn't happen before. All right, so we got Uncle Joe, we got a sociopath, we got your buddy who monologues all the time. Are we getting some pretty decent, crucial conversation skills? Okay, that's not what I originally wanted to talk about. I have just enough time to talk about what I originally wanted to talk about. But we got to get the background, because you can see how this feeling into our universal needs, which are the dignity of our being. Like when we look at each other and we see the vulnerability in beings, like our desire to be seen and to meet each other and to get enough sleep and to have like a sense of purpose in life, like that's the beautiful part of human beings. But even peace, love, and understanding liberals are subject to us versus them heuristics in our brain. And it's easy to think that some people have those dignified values and needs and other people don't. And I want to interrupt that first, before we do anything else. Before we disrupt anything, which is the last part of this talk, I want to interrupt first your and my bigotry. Because this is a Unitarian Universalist fellowship. And Universalists don't damn anyone to hell. Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, disrupting with empathy. Disrupting with empathy. So the first part is the warm-up. I would love if you go at your homework, find nice people who you like, who monologue a little bit, and interrupt them with empathy. Are you willing to do this homework? Hooray! Okay, good enough. Then by Thanksgivings, you'll be ready to interrupt with empathy about somebody with a divergent and slightly, not too ugly, don't go big yet. Athleticism, you gotta condition yourself, or maybe by Christmas, but slightly ugly to you opinion, and you're gonna interrupt them, wow, I really want to understand you. And start to think about what unique, dignified, and universal needs are they trying to meet by their interesting story and strategy that you would have never thought of and will not accede to. But another thing happens. In a community I was involved with, it came up that this subtle, I guess they call them microaggressions, but I don't want to overuse a word that's not often defined. So let's call it like subtly aggressive behavior or something like that. Somebody noticed that one character in this community would make offhand, slightly misogynist remarks. And, like when they would be sitting next to a younger woman. And so this conversation came up, and I'm hearing about this, and then what my mind said was like, well, did anybody say anything in that moment? Right? Did anybody go, hey, that sounded like what in my territory we call misogyny? Or are we talking about what's wrong with so-and-so over here? Because if you go back later and go, by the way, Bill, we've talked about it. We all think you might be a misogynist. I mean, sometimes you do have to have that conversation, do not get me wrong. But there's something that can happen if you are trained, where in the moment you can go like, hey, I don't know if you thought about this, but when you call women chicks, some people find that dehumanizing. I wonder, I couldn't help but overhear, and I couldn't help but interrupt. But I just wondered how your conversation felt about that when you were talking about the physical features of these chicks while you were next to a young woman. Are you willing to talk about that right now with my smiling face and my honoring of your innate worth and dignity? And you might be surprised at how willing someone is to talk about that if you bring your smiling face and your honoring of their innate worth and dignity. You might be surprised. So that's best case scenario you're in. Like if this happens at coffee hour, God forbid, but have that you're out there and oh well, blah 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 blah. You're now empowered. You've been trained to go like, excuse me. That outdated word was misogynistic when it was in style. Let's not do that. You want to talk about it? And because of the environment you're in, usually they do want to talk about it. Or, worst case scenario, they leave and then nobody has to deal with them again. I mean, no, we're educating from the heart. The worst case scenario, though, this is also a bully rescue technique. This was inspired by, because in the youth class we're talking a little bit about bullying. And so you should know, in case you haven't known yet, if someone is in a burqa on public transportation and then somebody else probably in a red hat starts laying into them, one of the best things you can do is just go and stand next to them and then ignore Captain Red Hat and say, how are you doing today? This is an awkward situation, isn't it? Huh. Would you like to move away? Why don't I come? Are you comfortable if I come with you? I'm concerned for your safety, and I'd like to make sure that you're not out here alone. Right? This is a really nice way to interrupt. So in that case, now, the good part, you don't have to have any empathy for Red Hat. You just have empathy for your friend, your new friend who you are protecting, right? Because that's pretty darn advanced, and that's Olympian level empathy. There are other bully rescue techniques where you actually catch the eyes of the people on public transit. There's a whole lot of stuff we can talk. There's such cool research, sad research about how complacent we are in the face of commonplace violence. But what you'll notice is nobody's had this talk yet. So we don't have any techniques. Things happen and we go, oh, shoot, what do I do? And by the time we figured out what do I do, there's no more chance to do it. So you who have had this talk, if you look around on the bus, you'll see a person over here going, and another person over here going, and another person over here going, and you can talk to those people and go like, I'm really uncomfortable with what's happening. how are you feeling about it? I'm really uncomfortable too. I'm going to go over and stand next to this person. Would you be willing to film this? I'm going to go over and stand next to this person. Would you be willing to call 911 if this guy gets violent? He seems a little unstable to me. I'm going to go stand next to this person. Would you be willing to intervene? You pick like a strapping lad or somebody who looks just like they came from the gym or something, or with a martial arts shirt on. Would you be willing to intervene if this looks like it's going to turn violent? And you get your buddies, right? And then all of a sudden, you've got these tools where before we were deer in the headlights. You can see this on the internet. It's really weird. Like people laying it, and then a whole troop of people on the bus in freeze response, right? Their trauma has been activated, and the system cannot move. The vagus nerve has shut down flow to the muscles, and we've gone into possum mode. So if we know we do not have to be possums anymore, you can disrupt with empathy. The point I'm trying to make in this case, we are asking for empathy. In the first case, we are giving empathy. It's easy to see our friends' universal human needs and values. That's why they're our friends. We saw that dignity sparkling through in spite of their stories and their strategies. We saw who they actually were. And then we practiced that for a while, and then even Uncle Joe, somebody probably thinks he's cool. And we can see there's dignity underneath there. And then, when we see someone insulting the dignity of another, we request or demand their empathy. In the moment, on the spot. But the last good news that I wanted to give you is that if you've been pumped up by my pep talk, if your compassionate muscles have been yoga stretched out by all of this innate worth and dignity, then best case scenario, you can come into that situation and say, hey, it looks like this person you're talking to is leaning away the more you lean in. And while I was standing over there, I couldn't help but notice that, and I felt a little uncomfortable. I wonder if you'd be willing to talk with me about that. And when we come with an open heart, in the best case scenario, sometimes you can actually educate people. You probably learned in elementary school, if you went to one like mine where they hit you with a ruler on the wrist, it was a Lutheran one, that fear doesn't make a great environment for learning. Openness, kindness, play makes a great environment for learning. So if you can come in with an open heart, 25 out of 26, or 24 out of 25, I forget the exact figure, of people are going to have a chance to be like, oh, you know, I never thought about how leaning in like this while the person leaning away might be seen as slightly predatory. That's just how I always talk. And you have a chance to teach them. On the other hand, if you go in, they were the 1 out of 25. They don't learn a darn thing. You didn't give yourself an ulcer. You didn't raise your cholesterol. You didn't raise your blood pressure. And everyone around you saw an act of kindness and upstanding and disruption with empathy. Empathy is a fundamental human nutrient that is rapidly being depleted from the soil of our society. Any chance we can, we should be planting this nutrient. So sometimes you're going to have to crack the soil. Sometimes you're going to have to pull out a weed. Sometimes you're going to have to cut through some fences and go in a guerrilla garden. But interrupting or disrupting, let's go for it. And finish up by singing a benediction to each other. You can rise and take hands.